introducing Mr. Soon-to-be Dr. Robert, aka Bob, Patterson, who will be debating the cons of recruiting foreign-trained nurses into the U.S. nursing workforce. And Miss, also soon-to-be Dr. Cynthia Shum, who will be debating the pros of recruitment. The goal of this presentation is to present the facts regarding foreign nurse recruitment to the United States. The presenters will utilize a parliamentary debate format. Each party will present their side of the argument, with the other party being allowed to interrupt the other to add a point of clarification or rebuttal.
Thank you, Amy, for that introduction. Before my colleague and I get started, I'd like to give an overview of foreign nurse recruitment into the United States. We have a long history of importing foreign nurses, which has been dominated by the Philippines, whose nurse migration pipeline to the U.S. was up to 75% in the mid-1980s.
There was a slowing of foreign nurse recruitment in the second half of the 1990s, and after 1998, proportions steadily grew. By 2001, the number of U.S.-trained RNs rose, reversing the decline since 1995. In addition, Filipino nurses represented more than half of the foreign graduates taking the U.S. exam in 2001. However, nurses from Canada, the United Kingdom, India, Korea, and Nigeria contributed about half that rate, topping 14% in 2000.
Historically, foreign nurses have had challenges receiving U.S. licensure, with only 28.88% internationally educated nurses reported passing the NCLEX exam, compared to 81.78% domestically trained nurses.
We have presented the background to you. The presenters will now debate the pros and cons of 4 key issues of foreign nurse recruitment. 1. Loss of economic HR investment in migrating country. 2. Gain in nursing workforce in recipient country. 3. Saturated workforce in recipient country. 4. Patient safety.
For the source country, the immigration of qualified registered nurses minimize the utility for healthcare institutions, healthcare personnel, and patients. What remains for the source countries are a weakened infrastructure, inferior technology, inadequate funding, and lack of resources to train qualified individuals to become RNs. In perhaps the most striking example, the Wall Street Journal recently noted that the number of Filipino nurses migrating abroad has created a domestic shortage and strain on the Philippines' healthcare system, rather than providing an economic benefit as it did in the previous years.
Bob, I appreciate the challenges associated with shortages of RNs and can sympathize with the difficulties this may bring upon the affected country. However, it is well established that the benefits these nurses gain will outweigh any potential short-term problems. Polsky et al., 2007, highlighted that foreign-trained nurses have been a small but steady part of the nursing workforce in the United States for more than 50 years. In addition, immigrating nurses acquire higher-level nursing skills working in the U.S., which they bring back to their home country. This is good for the profession as a whole. Furthermore, countries such as the Philippines have a larger pool of nurses than the U.S. Dr. Carney, 2005, noted that the Philippines, for example, educates a large portion of its population as nurses, intending many of them to immigrate to developed countries. From the Filipino government's perspective, the money helps to support a struggling national economy. Moreover, blocking the entry of skilled foreign professionals hurts U.S. patients and only diverts these professionals to other Western nations.
These are good points, Cynthia, but the Philippines is not the only country affected by foreign nurse recruitment. A growing number of other countries are facing a similar situation. Health Affairs cited that offshore recruiting initiatives have targeted English-speaking nurses from sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia and the Caribbean. Experienced nurses, especially those with specialty skills in surgical, neonatal or critical care nursing, are in particular high demand. The accelerated recruitment of experienced African nurses is straining an already fragile healthcare infrastructure in many African countries, which have been battered by AIDS and deprived of resources because of economic and political upheaval. Furthermore, 16 African countries have an average of 100 nurses per 100,000 population. 10 countries average 50 nurses per 100,000, 9 reported 20 per 100,000, and 3 have fewer than 10 nurses per 100,000. In stark contrast, US and UK ratios are 782 and 847 respectively in their country for positions abroad. In response, the Ghanaian government was begging recruiting nations to cease taking its nurses.
Foreign-trained nurses would not come to the U.S. to work if the benefits were equal in their home countries. The reality is that the numerous opportunities offered to nurses who work in the U.S. is not only lucrative on a personal level, but also for their families. The money they make working is used to improve their families' lifestyles. The U.S. healthcare system offers some of the highest levels of care, and foreign-trained nurses are able to acquire new knowledge and skills. The numbers you have presented for ratios do not factor in the complexity of the patients. Patients in the U.S. healthcare system receive much higher acuity care and require greater number of nursing hours. Again, the skills which foreign nurses gain while working in the U.S. are a benefit to the home country upon the nurse's return.
But, how many nurses actually return home, only to make significantly less than their counterparts in the U.S.? As well, not having the opportunity to put to use the technological skills, where many times the technology simply does not exist. Interestingly, the World Health Organization estimated that overseas healthcare workers sent approximately $70 billion to their source countries in 1995, 20 years ago. Unfortunately, much of the money was not reinvested back into the healthcare system and therefore, unable to offset the loss of skilled nurses, creating a vicious cycle. Although an increased salary is a great benefit to migrant nurses, there are also unfavorable consequences experienced by them. Previous research conducted by Omeri has shown that foreign-trained nurses have trouble adjusting to a new work environment, including language and cultural differences, as well as establishing relationships with their host nurses.
A 2015 report by staffing industry analysts points out that while the newest projections predict that while we will have an excess of nurses in the U.S., there will be a distributional imbalance at the state level, with 16 states projected to have shortfalls in their nursing supply. Rural areas and post-acute care facilities, such as skilled nursing facilities, are at an extreme disadvantage and are functioning with severe nursing shortages. A recent blog from a nursing webpage in 2015 noted that foreign-trained nurses are willing to work harder. Especially those from developing countries demonstrate willingness to work in the U.S., given the fact that they will earn more money. U.S. hospitals are beginning to hire only BSN-degreed nurses, in part to achieve magnet status, and that puts many American-educated nurses at a disadvantage. Nurses from the Philippines and India graduate with a bachelor's degree as part of their nursing curriculum. We must mention the cultural infusion that foreign nurses bring. This diversity is healthy for our society and meets the needs of many patients in hospital.
But, willingness to work harder and make a good salary doesn't translate to competent nurses. True, the U.S. has a shortfall of baccalaureate-prepared nurses, but I'm reminded that the Institute of Medicine's recommendation number 4, increase the number of baccalaureate degree nurses to 80% by the year 2020, has already made strides in California. A recent academic progression in nursing performance dashboard, funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, discovered that with 53.2% of nurses reporting a BSN or higher degree in 2012, it is now up to 61.5% in 2014, an 8.3% increase in just 2 years. Over-reliance on foreign-educated nurses by the healthcare industry would only continue to serve to postpone efforts to address the needs of nursing students in the U.S. workforce. In a recent interesting message, the American Nursing Association maintains that it is inappropriate to look overseas for nursing workforce relief when the real problem is the fact that Congress does not provide sufficient funding for domestic schools of nursing. The U.S. healthcare industry has failed to maintain a work environment that retains experienced nurses, and the U.S. government is not engaged in active health workforce planning to build a sustainable nursing and health professions workforce for the future.
Bob, the fact is that we do not have a Congress which provides sufficient funding. It is common knowledge that the new graduate nursing residency programs are lacking. In these tough economic times, costs must be addressed, and the fact remains that recruiting and relocating a foreign-trained nurse is less expensive and shorter in duration than the training of a new grad. Onboarding a new nurse is extensive and costs a hospital approximately $96,000. Or in some estimates, 0.75 to 2 times a nurse's salary.
Well, we've hit the halfway mark. Time for everyone to get up and stretch for a few minutes before we continue with the next pieces.